Some major debt decision announcements are in the wind this week. The deadline for the U.S. debt ceiling is approaching, and Eurozone leaders are meeting in Brussels to reach some kind of a deal to ease the debt problem in Greece. This is all good grist for Michael Levy's brain. He's a business and financial analyst who drops by once a month or so to chat with us. It is my pleasure to welcome Michael Levy back to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Good morning.
Lots to tell. It's a bit of a gong show in Washington, D.C. Three-ring circus.
Real gong show. You know, it boils down to two words: politics and policy. They've got to practice policy. They're not. They're practicing politics, and that's what's making it a gong show, Fanny.
How did the United States of America get here? Why are they here?
Well, by spending.
In such debt.
In such debt, by spending and continuing to spend with reckless abandon. It's almost a feeling of entitlement that Americans have. Borrow and spend, and entitlement of what the government can provide. Now, we've seen that in Greece. They had huge protests and riots. We're seeing it in Italy, Spain, Portugal, Ireland. But in the U.S., you wouldn't expect it because they had a balanced budget coming out of the Clinton years. Ronald Reagan put it in place to balance the budget. Tough decisions, real tough decisions. Clinton got the really good ride out of it, and arguably he was a good president, and came out of the Clinton era into the George W. era with a balanced budget. This year, their deficit is $1.4 trillion. That's with 12 zeros. All right, so let me tell you what 1.4 trillion is. It's 3 times what our national debt is here in Canada, and that's going to be their deficit. If you say debt ceiling to the average American, they're just going to go like this. I don't see any. I mean, they just don't know. They have no conception of what's going on.
Well, as you know, I'm half and half American, half Canadian, and I will tell you that the middle class in America knows. They don't know what the debt ceiling is, perhaps. Well, the smarter ones would, but as you know, the middle class in America is struggling.
Very much so, and that's why they know, is because they are struggling. With unemployment at 9.2%, let's compare to Canada at 7.2%, well, you can't recover an economy with that many people out of work. With the housing market, not just in the doldrums, but in the tank and staying down there, there's no wealth being built, there's no confidence being built. With 1 out of every 8 Americans who have debt on their home in trouble, okay, in trouble. Either they're defaulting, or they owe their bank back payments, or they're in foreclosure. I mean, that's huge. So when you don't have that confidence, if you don't know whether you're going to have a job next month, if your house is worth far less than the mortgage on it and you can't afford the payments, you have a consumer confidence that just isn't there compared to us.
Well, as you know, big government often zaps small people. Just does. The total debt is how many trillion?
14.3 trillion, again with 12 zeros. Now, let me put that into perspective. In 2004, it was 5.7 trillion. Today, it's 14.3 trillion debt. In the same period of time that the U.S. debt was escalating up until the recession hit in 2008, Canada had paid off $92 billion of our debt. In other words, we were going completely in the opposite direction as to the U.S. They were adding to theirs, and we were paying ours down.
Well, I listened to the U.S. President last night, Barack Obama, talk to the people, and I also listened to the Speaker of the House, the Republican Speaker of the House, talk to the people, and they seem to be on 2 different paths.
They're on 2 different planets.
Pretty much.
Well, the problem is that let's start with the leader of the House, the Speaker of the House, John Boehner.
Yes.
He was speaking in untruths. He was accusing Obama of things that were not true. He said a medical care system out of control. It hasn't added to the budget deficit. They haven't started spending on it yet. So you can't bring up, it's politics. But you have the President of the United States who has failed to make a deal. And by the way, as Harry Truman said, the buck stops here. So if it's a problem, it's going to be Obama's problem. And the reason the Republicans are pushing back so hard is they want him out of office. So if a debt deal is not made, Obama will wear it, and they hope that they will then be able to force him out of office next year.
Sure, hence politics. Now, Obama calls for a balanced approach. He said last night, compromise is not a dirty word, and we cannot get out of this mess on the backs of students or seniors or veterans. We've got to cut defense spending, and it went on and on.
But that's tugging at heartstrings, because they don't necessarily have to cut Social Security payments. They don't necessarily have to cut Medicare payments. They can structure their cuts wherever they want. So that's playing out politics for the first part of any kind of a default.
Okay.
In other words,
so more the big corporate moguls takes them from the hedge fund managers, higher taxes, what?
well, we've done that in British Columbia. I mean, we're talking now, let's just go provincial for a minute. If we're going to get the cuts in the HST rate, if it passes, well, it's because we've put a tax on somewhere else. In other words, the corporate tax cut that was going to take place in BC will not take place. So we have compromised in British Columbia, and it didn't even make a I mean, it's just part of what we accept. In the U.S., what they're asking for, this compromise, is just not selling with the new Republicans, the Tea Party Republicans. They don't want to see tax increases. They want to see Obama out of office. So they are setting their hair on fire over a tax increase for Americans that make over $250,000 a year, for huge corporations. And it's not even a tax increase, Fanny. It's letting the tax cut run out without extending it.
Okay, so they're not going to give Obama a blank check. It doesn't seem as they're going to give Obama a blank check. I don't know that he wants a blank check, but he wants something to get the U.S. out of this debt ceiling mess. Will the U.S. default?
Well, here's the problem.
For the first time ever.
Obama wants the deal to go through the 2012 election.
Of course he does.
The
Back to
Republicans
politics.
want a 6-month deal so they can argue this again before the election. If Obama were to go short term, the Republicans, in my mind, would allow some tax increases. It's all a matter of the Republicans want to force him out of office. Obama wants a long-term deal that takes it through the election, and the Republicans want a short-term deal so they can fight it on the election hustings.
Sure, but the president has the power of veto.
Absolutely.
Oh, so it's destabilizing. What spooks investors worldwide when this happens in Congress and between the congressmen and the senators and the congresswomen and all of this is going on? What spooks investors most? World investors, global players?
Not knowing, the lack of information. That what spooks, if I tell you the markets are going down, everybody agrees the markets are going down, you know how to handle it. If you're in a bull market, you know how to handle it. But if you are going like this, what's going on here? You go to the sidelines, you go to safe havens. So we see investors now worldwide going to the Swiss franc because it's a safe haven currency, buying gold because it's a safe haven. They can park their money, and coming to Canada because it's a safe haven, our dollar at 3-year highs because investors are parking their money here.
Right.
What spooks investors most? Lack of knowing what's going on. They are so afraid of the repercussions of what's going to happen in the U.S. if they don't come to some sort of a solution. They don't know what's going to happen. Is the stock market going to crash? Is the U.S. dollar going to crash? Is gold going to take off? Is the U.S. economy going into the tank? These are all questions that will only be answered as it unfolds.
But I thought that if the U.S. economy goes into the tank, that undermines the value of currency everywhere, doesn't it? The currency reserves around the world.
Actually, Canada would be an immediate recipient of worldwide investment as we are now. So the Canadian dollar, short term, if the U.S. defaults and their economy starts to get weak, short term, money will flow into Canada. And instead of being at $1.06 like we are this morning, we could be $1.09, $1.10. That's only short term, because as the U.S. economy weakens because of what's going on down there, Canada suffers big time. 75% of what we export from Canada goes to the U.S. If their consumers stop buying, it affects Canada, it affects China, It affects the rest of Asia, but particularly to us, if they stop buying what we're making, our economy will then start to give it up. Also, our dollar will give it up. So we would see a longer-term repercussion in Canada than what would be pleasant.
Okay, so what about China? How long will China put up with all of this? Because as you know, we're connected
well,
financially, or the U.S. is definitely connected. How so?
China holds more U.S. debt than any other country in the world. So when the U.S. sells their government treasuries, their bonds, in order to finance the working of government, when they sell it, then China buys those bonds in order to finance the U.S., and they've been buying them. They own about $800 billion worth of U.S. treasuries. Now, why do they buy them? Well, if they keep the U.S. economy going, then the U.S. takes those dollars, comes back to China, buys their exports, imports them into the U.S., and you have this circle going. We'll supply you with the money. You manufacture, sell to us. We'll supply you with the money. Well, all of a sudden, China is going to go like this. Wait a minute. Just wait a minute. First of all, they're not buying as much U.S. debt as they did because they're a little bit afraid, and they're moving out to other places, and they're buying some European debt. They're buying some Canadian debt. When I say debt, debt instruments, bonds.
Right.
But they say, wait a minute. If the U.S. is going to temporarily default, maybe we want higher interest rates because there's a risk involved in the U.S. not paying their bills. That's number one. Number two, in China, they have a housing bubble, not a boom, a bubble. A bubble that is unbelievable compared to what we see here, what they saw in the United States. House prices are so inflated in China, the Chinese government is raising interest rates to stop this speculation. So you've got inflation in China, Chinese government raising rates, China afraid right now to buy as much in the way of U.S. treasuries. So there's a bit of a slowdown in China, which also affects us, affects the U.S. So it's not just one place, it's globalization. You go to Europe, you've got Greece defaulting, and they're actually defaulting.
Yes, in spite of the meetings in Brussels, and when we come back, we'll talk about that. Greece defaulting. Michael Levy, our guest, he's a business and financial analyst.